Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Something we have been doing recently on this channel is looking at many beat-em-ups from the golden age of that particular genre. Amongst these videos, we have looked at the original Golden Axe title, the Mega Drive's first two-player cooperative beat-em-up game that was inspired by Double Dragon 2 and went on to have its game engine reused in the creation of Streets of Rage. Golden Axe was a fantastic game and an important piece of the puzzle in the Mega Drive success story. In fact, it would be tough to find a Mega Drive owner who doesn't have an appreciation for such a game. Today, we are going to look at the game's sequel, simply entitled Golden Axe 2. And we will be measuring it up to see how it stands against the classic original. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Golden Axe 2, and a look at whether or not it is a worthy sequel. Yeah! After the success of the first Golden Axe game on the Sega Mega Drive in 1989, and its popular run as an arcade game, the game illustrated enough demand for Sega to want to create a sequel to the all-time classic. 2 years removed from the release of the original game, Sega are now in quite a different spot than they were just a few years prior. The first Golden Axe game had already brought a reasonable amount of attention to the 16-bit Sega system, but earlier in 1991 the platform had received both the release of Sonic the Hedgehog and Streets of Rage, two more of the most iconic games of all time. Sega Mania was in full swing, and a sequel to Golden Axe that year would just further incentivise consumers to continue to jump on board with Sega. But as mentioned, this was over 2 years later, and the company were not only evolving in the home market, but also in the arcades. Whilst the Sega Mega Drive system's architecture was heavily based off of the company's 16-bit arcade boards from the mid-80s, on the arcade front, Sega had now moved on and had begun to use 32-bit boards, simply known as the Sega System 32. This board, which utilised an NEC V60 processor, was much more powerful than that of the technology found in the Mega Drive home consoles. Therefore, in order to have a two-pronged attack and conquer on both fronts, this time around Sega would opt to make two completely different Golden Axe games, each acting as a sequel optimised for its hardware. The System 32 game, Golden Axe The Revenge of Death Adder, would not arrive until the following year of 1992, so we shall focus on that game at a later date. Today we are very much fixated on the Mega Drive title, simply known as Golden Axe 2, the home sequel to the original game. The game that was both developed and published by Sega has a nice little introductory scene that establishes the game's narrative. The title is set just a few years removed from the original game, and peace is threatened once again in the land of Uria by evil powers. The threat arrives this time in the form of the Lord of Darkness, Lord Gold, who, as the game's text suggests, should have been imprisoned in ancient times, but has risen again. In the past, he and his clan have destroyed entire countries, so the three warriors throw themselves into battle once again. Before beginning a playthrough, the players reach a player select screen, where they can choose from one of the three lovable characters established in the previous game. Gilius Thunderhead, Axe Battler and Tyrus Flare are all back for another round, and ready to slay hordes of enemies once again. All the sprites within the game have been drawn using a special touchpad drawing tablet, technology that was not as established back then as it is today. This cutting-edge tech used positional sensor technology that had been developed by Sega themselves and used in the game World Derby, which was released 4 years earlier in the arcades back in 1987. Past Golden Axe though, the tech's biggest triumph would arrive in 1993, when an actual Sega console would be released utilising this technology. This system of course was the Sega Pico, the popular educational system that even outsold the Mega Drive itself in Japan. I uploaded a long in-depth video on this hardware over the summer, but it is interesting to learn the same style pad was also used in the development of Golden Axe 2. All this history ties together. As you can see, the title shares many similarities with that of the first game. The title is yet another side-scrolling arcade-style hack-and-slash beat-em-up. Once again, the dwarf known as Gilius Thunderhead wields an axe, the Amazon known as Tyrus Flare wields a longsword, and the barbarian known as Axe Battler wields a two-handed sword. Just to clarify, as it seemed to cause a bit of confusion in the last Golden Axe upload, Axe Battler is named Axe Battler as he battled against Death Adder in the previous game, the villain who wielded the Golden Axe. So he is named Axe Battler as he battles against people who wield axes, not because he is a battler with an axe. I hope that clears that little misconception up. Knowledge is the bomb. In terms of gameplay mechanics, not much has changed at all really from the first game. However, there are a few improvements here and there which make somewhat of a difference. The back attack, which could be executed in the first game, has been swapped out for a move that can now hit enemies from all sides, which can be slightly more useful. Tapping the D-pad left and right now also allows the player to choose which direction they throw enemies in after grabbing them. This is advantageous in the fact that you can now target which enemy you want to throw your gripped opponent into, or even if positioned right, just throw them off a bloody cliff. The magic system, one of the features unique to the previous game, also sees changes in this sequel. In the first game, collecting magic pots allowed the player to perform more powerful attacks. However, in the second entry, the player can now use part or all of their magic meter, which is determined by holding the button then releasing it when the meter reaches the desired level. The actual magic attacks of each character have also seen change. Tyrus retains the fire magic, but Axe Battler now uses the wind magic and Gilius uses rock magic. The characters have also been tweaked to make them stand out more from one another. For example, Axe Battler now has more reach when using his sword than that of Tyrus and can use his strength to throw enemies further. There are cosmetic differences for characters too, such as Gilius now wears black gauntlets and Axe Battler now has a shoulder guard. You start your playthrough out in what appears to be a war-torn, highly damaged village, not looking too different from much of the scenery that was present in the first game. Dead bodies can be seen though in some doorways, which is a nice touch illustrating the severity of the situation. Enemies throughout the stage feature the club-wielding orc-like creatures, who, like the Golden Axe series itself, was inspired by the work of Tolkien. Mages also appear throughout the game, who drop spell books that act to fill up your magic meter when collected. It's all very high fantasy. Speaking of high fantasy, today's video is sponsored by On the Island of Grotesque, a fantasy ebook short story by Australian author Joe Gillam. A young knight named Sir Jasper Austenbury is in search for love. To win the heart of the young maiden, Sir Jasper and his friends will seek wealth and glory on a monster-infested island. What they find will change the world, a tale of knights, adventure, beautiful women and monsters. So, if you like Golden Axe, then this book may be appealing to you. The book is available on Amazon and Smashwords with the links for these in the description. Yeah! Quickly shifting back to Golden Axe now though, as you fight your way through the village you find yourself in Woodlands, which once again is not too dissimilar from the opening stage from the original entry. So far you can very much tell that you are playing a Golden Axe game once more. Crossing a bridge later in stage 1 though, you end up in a swamp-like area, which is where a boss battle takes place against a minotaur-like beast. In between stages, text and imagery appears to recap what the player just did, and more importantly, explaining where the character is going next, in order to further strengthen the game's narrative storytelling. Between stages are also scenes where the character rests at a campfire, and has the opportunity to attack more mages and increase their magic gauges. Stage 2 finds the player fighting their way through a mountain range and progressing towards an ancient ruin. The mages and orc-like creatures re-emerge in this stage, some riding cockatrices. Once again, like the previous instalment, if you demount your enemies, you can ride these steeds yourself and use their tail whipping ability. The Jason and the Argonaut style sword and shield wielding skeletons also resurface here, however sadly not literally this time. Instead of rising up from the ground, they just simply walk onto the screen like other enemies, which is nowhere near as cool. Something I failed to mention when talking about the first stage, throughout some of these you see civilians running in the opposite direction to where you are heading. This is another nice touch and further builds up tension as you get closer to each boss fight. Stage 3 apparently takes place in the enemy's headquarters. The stage features crossing a tall bridge, once again a scene reminiscent from many stages in the first game, then into a cave. This very short stage culminates in a boss fight with purple lizard people. The next stage sees you fighting your way through the cave, which is apparently known as Dragon's Throat. Amusingly, once inside it becomes very clear as the stage literally looks like hell on earth, which makes sense considering the insides of dragons are meant to be all fiery. There doesn't seem to be any new enemies in here, just palette swaps of many of the baddies you have faced throughout the game. Even the boss fight takes place against palette swaps of the Minotaur, faced at the beginning of the first stage. All I can say is that this is getting out of hand. Now there are two of them. We do encounter a steed though, which is completely new to the game, which is a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one, when we get to control these fire-breathing, fast-jumping dragon thingies. This is where the fun begins. Next, the player must progress towards the castle gate, in a stage that looks very similar to the stage leading to the castle in the first game. No new enemies to report here, and once again the boss fight is just two copies of the end boss from stage 2. Once on the next stage and inside the castle, you fight your way once again through various palette swaps of recurring enemies. This includes the Minotaur, who has been palette swapped once again, but this time appears throughout the stage as just another enemy to down. When you finally get to face off against Lord Gold, he stands up leaving his head on the throne, revealing him as an imposter and just a gold version of the Headless Knight. Upon winning this battle, you enter the real Lord Gold's chamber to finally take him on head to head. As clever as that pun just was, in this final boss fight you face off against one of the least original looking final encounters in history, as sadly Lord Gold's true form just looks like a gold coloured version of both Death Adder and Death Bringer from the previous game. Lord Gold 2, as expected, wields the Golden Axe, and when defeated obviously triggers the credits to roll. Apart from the main game, which we just took a look at, Golden Axe 2 also features dual mode, once again a feature that was included within the first Golden Axe Mega Drive release. Dual mode takes place on a single screen, and you take part in a gauntlet trying to defeat as many enemies as possible. So, nothing really new here either. So from everything I've just showed you today, as you can see, Golden Axe 2 is extremely similar to the original Golden Axe game. The game would receive mixed views from critics, with many deeming the game as no more than a rehash of the first entry, and not much was added to improve the core gameplay. The game would receive a lot of positive responses though regarding its music, as the soundtrack is arguably even stronger than the game's predecessor. All in all, I have to say I agree with the reviewer's general consensus, as the game presents a very similar experience to the original, with a severe lack of substantial changes. Despite this though, the original Golden Axe is a great game, so the game does no harm for those who simply want more of the same. Both Sonic the Hedgehog and Streets of Rage massively raised the bar when it came to making the sequels to those classic games at a slightly later date than Golden Axe 2. Golden Axe 2 on the other hand sadly doesn't even attempt to pull off such a feat. What I will say though is that Golden Axe The Return of Death Adder in the arcades did innovate on the formula, but that is a tale for another time. So to answer the final question of whether or not Golden Axe 2 is a worthy sequel, in terms of innovation over the few years between this game and the first, I would say no, it was not a worthy sequel. But if you simply want something that was decent already, then the game is worth playing, in terms of replicating the gameplay experience found within the predecessor. So ladies and gentlemen, that's all I really have to say about the game. Essentially it's like Golden Axe but more, kind of like if they made Golden Axe today, then release some DLC levels at a later date. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of this game. Did you procure both of these games back in the day for your Mega Drive? Let me know down below. If you want more content like this, then make sure you like, subscribe and hit the notification bell to get multiple new retro gaming videos every week on here. Finally, my channel is partially funded by the generous donations I receive via Patreon. Patrons can earn a credit and a shout out at the end of these videos. These people make working full time on YouTube just that little bit less scary, so I'd like to thank you all very much for that. Huge shoutouts also go out to Carl Johnson, Sebastian Veles, JD Robbins, Synth Spaces, Andrew Bazanski, Osobi Kwan DX, Michael Baker, Tom Elliott, Computer Man, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Daniel Daly, RetroVersion.com, House of Ted, Dan Barlow Jr., Joel, and all of my other patrons for making YouTubing just that little bit easier. Yeah.